Loud
There you
slurp
go.
there for you. How y'all doing? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you guys are having a good week so far. I feel like, did I miss a holiday? Happy Eclipse Day, I guess. I don't
Oh,
know.
yeah, that's right. That happened.
Yeah, that was a thing that happened. It was pretty brief, and I don't know. You were kind of in dead center of it, but over here
Yeah.
we were like, we got like a little crescent. It wasn't anything.
No, it's crazy. I was in the dead center of it, and I don't think I was taking it as seriously until up into it. Like, I'm like, big deal. But after a while, it started coming to me like, you know what? This is like a rare event to occur. And the
Yeah.
thing that doesn't allow me to sleep at night is just the thought that what are the chances that we're living in a time where the distance we are from the sun equals the size of the moon based on the distance it is from I don't know what I'm saying, to where the moon and the sun are the same
I
size.
saw someone commenting about that because they were saying that like it is an infinitesimal possibility that
Yeah.
and it's one of those things that like if you believe in a higher power, this is more of that evidence to suggest it because it's like,
That
you
or
know,
ancient aliens.
yeah,
It's
ancient
that's the
aliens,
thing,
exactly.
which is could be the same thing. Like, that's again, I think that kind of points to it. Like, I feel like and let's get your thought on this. What are the chances that this is random?
Oh, it's 0%.
Considering all the other random things that happen to occur, like we're the only creature on this planet with this level of awareness.
Yeah, there's
It's
definitely some intelligent design. Yeah, intelligent design involved. But hey, we are getting way ahead of ourselves. I feel like we
that's
dove in like right at the deep end. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk Gundam gaming and really just getting deep into it, getting right into the weeds. I am Midnight Hatter, aka Steven, your host, and joining me as always is Adam Blue from Gundam Explained. How are you doing, my friend?
no, doing good. It's been a good week, a mix of, busy work schedule and you know, uh, pumping out some videos I'm gonna explain that I tried to make different than my standard. Like how I did that like quick little like Zeta discussion about it being the best sequel, taking a specific element
The best
and then
anime of all time. You can say it's the
yeah,
best.
I liked that comment actually. When you made that comment, I was like, "That's the real discussion here." But no, and then today it was looking at these Lego mechs that came
Yeah.
out like 2016 before I got into Gundam, and I was just so fascinated by them. I would buy them, set them, and I've always had them. It's funny because I didn't want to take them apart or put them in a box and lose them. So there's like my nightstand has this bottom shelf that's never used. So I just hid them in there for years. And we got a new nightstand, and I'm like, "Oh, wait, these guys are in here."
You
So I
go.
decided to take them out, just talk about them.
Yeah,
So,
and you know what's interesting is that ties into the stuff that I'm interested in as far as like tabletop gaming goes is like there's that Lego based game Mobile Frame Zero, which, you basically
oh
create
yeah,
custom mechs using Legos and then, you have like this whole mech combat system. So, might be interesting to try and tie those in together.
yeah. I'm gonna look back into that because I'm telling you, just looking at the Legos and knowing I can modify, there was just something fun with that.
Yeah. There's and I think that that's one of the reasons that Lego has persisted as such a popular toy for so long is that it goes back to the conversation that we have frequently about game design and, you know, expressing player creativity and players making their own fun. I mean, I think that that's where
Yes.
Lego comes from. Like, people want to build things, they want to
Yeah.
create. And I
It,
think that, going back to that idea of intelligent design, if we are creatures with a creator, then we have a creative instinct inbuilt in what we do. And that's why we're here. It's why we keep doing
yeah.
everything that we do.
We're another creature that expresses ourselves in such a very interesting way.
Yeah.
But, going back real quick, it unlocked a memory, and it's all coming to me. In 1998, there was a made-for-TV film called Gold Rush with Bruce Campbell. That's the only
Yes.
reason I knew about it and wanted to watch it because I was like, "Hey, Bruce Campbell movie." But I
Jin
just
could
remember
kill.
watching it after getting home from Toys R Us with a mech Lego that it wasn't made where the legs moved or anything, but it was like an old I'll have to look up what that was from, but it was like a '90s Lego mech, and then I
That's
was watching
awesome.
the movie. Times don't change that
No,
much.
no, they don't. Oh man. Well, Speaking of which, we're going to be talking about some gaming stuff today. This past weekend for a supporter stream, I was working on the video game that I've been building out. It is a mecha game, so again, ties into everything that we talk about here. And we were experimenting with some different combat systems, and we're going to be exploring the pros and cons of both of those here. As well as there was some news that just completely flew under the radar for me that I think we should touch on. But before we get into that, I do want to thank new Patreon members Sean Law and Lil Krill. I haven't gotten your names added to the ticker down at the bottom yet, but thank you guys so much for the support, and I
Wait,
hope you
did
are
you
enjoying
say
the show.
Lil Krill?
Lil Krill.
That's neat. That's like a rapper name right there.
It is, yeah.
That creative.
um So yeah, first let's dive into this news that again, Adam, I just asked you, had you heard
Oh, yeah.
about this that the metaverse is coming back for a limited time?
No, and it's funny because I was telling you earlier, I kinda just ignore metaverse news until something like tangible comes out, but knowing that there's 1,000 works by fans means there's must be a lot going on.
Yeah, and
Maybe
I would
just with
say
the
that,
fans.
cuz I gave this article a quick rundown. It looks like it's going to be opening what? It's open well, it was open March 15th, so it's been open for a while
Ah,
here.
okay. I did
But
hear that.
the article's kind of misleading, or at least the headline is, because it's 1,000 works by Gunpla fans are on display, but only a very select few are being rendered in 3D, like
Ah, okay.
the model scanning, right? So I'm not sure what the process was for. Oh yeah, so it looks like the event period was March 15th to March 17th, and then March 22nd to March 24th. So this has already kind of happened. But
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just realizing because I remember seeing that, but I wasn't taking it seriously because I'm like, this isn't out yet. But seeing, the participating regions and the times, it's more real than I'm giving it credit for.
yeah, for sure. And so and one of the things that kind of drew me to it was seeing like some of these custom works that are being displayed. So like there it is. So this is
Oh,
like a custom Gunpla. Obviously, you've got like a little Gundam head with a with a Hooters logo on the
let's see
breastplate,
what
which is
that is.
always
Oh my
nice.
gosh.
So yeah, I love this like junker design. It's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's weird because when I first saw that little image, I was like, there's some familiarity, but some new things. It makes it pretty cool.
Yeah. So there were several builders who had their digital dioramas scanned in. Now, again, this is one of those things where it's like, did they have a scanning tool that was offered? Did they like take pictures with their phone, or were they taken in at like the Hong Kong facility and they said, "Let us, scan your model with like our $10,000 equipment." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where obviously I am excited, trepidatiously excited about the metaverse because of some of these things that they're able to do. Um, and so yeah, with the dioramas, obviously the results look really good, but who knows whether that's a lot of post processing and polish or whether that's like straight out of the box. That's what you can do from home. And
Oh, yeah,
again,
but
oh, go
I
ahead.
like what I'm seeing though from
Yeah,
those.
yeah. I mean, this is
Uh,
pretty sweet. Now that was just the diorama section. So there was like, people that were scanning in dioramas. Other people were scanning in just their model. And this to me looks closer to what I would expect, like a home scanner to produce. Because as you
right,
can
edges
see,
are gonna be a little iffy, yeah.
yeah, like the textures, there's like a weird gradient going on in the color. So like you can tell that this scan was taken with like above lighting so that the top of the colors are a little washed out and a little desaturated, and then as you
Yeah,
go down like the legs are super dark, and that's probably because shadows were being cast on it at the time.
right.
So this looks more realistic to what I think a consumer grade scan would look like.
Yeah, because, you could just consider nowadays, I know we say it's AI, but the software processing that they've got going on where you snap some pictures, feed it to them, there's probably a degree of it understanding through machine learning or knowing how to kinda put that together. It's probably gonna just improve over time.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would hope, and hopefully, one of the things that they can do to probably improve this process would be to upload, like, a library of Gunpla parts, because they already have all the
Oh,
3D
yeah.
models of their parts, and so what you can do is, like, maybe with, some kind of algorithm or
Yeah,
AI involved.
matching.
Yeah, we can, like, compare and, like, "Oh, I see, you used this part, so rather than use your photo of this part, I'm gonna use our 3D model and sub it in." Kinda
That's
like,
a great idea.
so speaking of the eclipse, everyone was trying to take pictures of the eclipse with their phones, right? And I know that, Android phones do this, where it's like if you try to take pictures of the night sky, it doesn't show you a picture of the night sky. There's an algorithm in your phone that basically is generating what it thinks you're trying to take a picture of, which I think is probably the most deceptive thing.
Yeah, yeah, I have a video, and I'll have to share it with every well, it's actually in the general of the Gonna Explain Discord,
Oh,
but
sweet.
it was me looking, because we were sitting and there was, the elementary school across the street, but we let our youngest stay home. And it's funny, the kids were in the school just like screaming. And so I filmed them screaming and then looking up at the eclipse,
Yeah,
but it looked like it was daytime, which is that software that you're speaking of. It's trying to
yeah,
take what you're intending, though, and changing it to be visible. So
exactly.
if they're going to implement that here, I'm sure that's less constraints to have to worry about. I doubt people are gonna be taking pictures and, you know, or the pictures, the color, because that's the thing. Even if it matches the part, then there's the colors. They're gonna be like, okay, this is a red, and then afterwards, it's like approve the color choices, and then you can like edit the hex or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. I mean, there's so many things that go into it, and we're gonna get into some programming talk here in a minute, like about how complex this stuff gets. This is
Yeah.
way above my pay grade when it comes to the types of technologies that they're employing.
But I want to say real quick, and I want to give Bandai credit because this seems like they are trying to figure out how to utilize AI
Hmm.
without trying to tell people, "Hey, we're getting into AI," and they're, like, implementing it as practically as possible,
Yeah.
I think.
Now, of course, this is where everyone's getting real excited, right? Gunpla battles.
Oh,
So they
yeah.
did have a Gunpla battle sample. It looks like you could only select from, builders that they had uploaded their models. So this is
Oh,
again,
cool.
when so far we've only been talking about like uploading just a 3D model, but then when you're talking about rigging and animating a 3D model from just photos,
Oh, yeah.
that's like a whole other animal. So I think that these were obviously like pre-built and pre-rigged and all that stuff.
That makes sense because I wonder how much it will take into account the armaments that are included, armor types, weapon types that could add weight distribution, or would a function change, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, what types of variables are we talking about? What's the combat going to be like? I mean, it looks like they have a pretty cool image in here of like rolling. There's an HP, but that's really all you get. There's not a whole lot going.
Yeah, interesting. Huh, I'll have to so wait a minute, is there any videos online of people battling in the
I
metaverse?
haven't looked for them yet, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think that someone has to have uploaded these things since they
I
did
wonder.
this
Yeah, I
last
wonder
month,
if there's either NDA thing or restriction or
quite
but
possibly.
I really wanna see the combat. The combat is what's gonna make it or break it for me.
I agree. I think that most people are going to be in it for the combat, and so the majority of people who had their work featured were featured in the museum, which I think is probably the most deceptive part of this article is the fact that like, oh, we featured 1,000 creators. Well, most of them it was just photos that we rendered on a wall that you can walk into and like,
Which, on one hand, that is pretty cool, even though that doesn't necessarily satisfy the point of the metaverse. But I guess for something that's going to be a place where you can hang out and maybe look and have its own history, it
yeah.
would be cool to go places where you can see photos from different time periods of Gundam stuff happening, since the creation of the metaverse.
Yeah, that would be
You know,
particularly sweet. So I mean there's so much user generated content potential with it, and
yeah.
yeah, I mean, like I said, I am trepidatiously excited about what they do with it. I'm glad that, they weren't dissuaded by fan reactions to the initial. um,
Yeah, I know.
because it would be so easy to become discouraged about working on a project like this when there's no clear, what I would say, like, there's no clear incentive or like financial incentive at the end of it, right? Like, you
Yeah,
know,
it's interesting because it seems like the concept is an inevitability.
right.
So it's almost like, let's just try to jump on this concept. It's kinda like when the Xbox first came out. Microsoft didn't care really. They didn't know what the end they just wanted to make sure they had boxes in everyone's living room.
Yeah.
Um, so,
And I think that
yeah,
it paid off. I mean, obviously,
yeah.
oh man, the original launch titles on the Xbox were amazing. Like,
Yeah, they were different things. It was a variety. It was pretty interesting. I mean, for me, I mean, Halo was neat, but I got it for Dead or Alive 3 because I was a huge fighting game fan, and to me,
yeah.
that was like the transition. But anyway, we're gonna talk about enough games here shortly.
Yeah, we are going to talk about some gaming things. And this is actually there's two topics that I want to talk about when it comes to like AI design in games. And of course, um Gundam games are infamous for having terrible AI. I think that part of it is that, especially with like Gundam Battle Operation 2, you're talking about they're using the same engine and the same AI that they've been using since Crossfire and 0081. So,
Yeah, and it reminds me of like the AI in Code Fairy, where it's almost like they have to tune it to have an outcome,
yeah,
and that might be hard at first, but then once you realize what it's trying to do, then you just game it.
right.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. So there are certain things that I think make a gameplay more tactical, and certain things that I think make just make it more fun, really. And we're going to talk about like cover-based mechanics, and we're going to talk about different ways that shooters handle damage and collisions. And this is something that came up on a video that I did with Talos Mobius. If you're not familiar with him, check him out on YouTube. He's a friend of the channel, friend of Gundam Explained. And so he and Alter were recording a video about some of the hidden stats in GBO2. And I was lucky to contribute to that conversation. And one of the things that I noticed is that, or this is speculative, I should say, because I don't know for sure how they handle it, but I am 95% sure that GBO2 uses a combination of two types of damage calculation, right? So when you're coding a game, you can either use raycasts, which are, just invisible lines draw from point A to point B, and when that raycast hits something, then you do something. Or you can use colliders, which would be like if I have an object with a collider attached to it and it hits something else, then we do something. So when you are working with ranged weapons, as is most of GBO2, you can either have your guns calculate the damage at the point of shooting because the raycast is instant, or you can have the firearm shoot a projectile, and then when the projectile hits, then you calculate the damage based on when it hits the object. And one of the things that I noticed is that, especially with like machine guns and beam rifles, they must be using raycasting because in order to account for the lag in like P2P netcode, they have to ensure that if you're aiming at something, you know that you hit it even if the animation doesn't confirm that. And I'm pretty sure people have seen examples of that where it's like you're shooting and you might have trailed off, but you're still kind of hitting the enemy.
Yep.
Um, but the flip side of that is that they have to be using damage colliders for the melee weapons at least, if not also, weapons like the bazookas and like
Oh, yeah.
explosive
Slower
ranged weapons,
long-ranged things. Yeah.
because those have to be collider based because you have splash damage and like that. So you can't
Or
calculate that.
well, okay, I was wondering, like, what if you threw a grenade and exploded? Could it use ray casting for the point of explosion?
That would probably be inefficient
Oh,
for the
okay.
purpose of, because then like you're sphere casting, which like at that point,
Oh, okay.
um
Sphere casting, of course.
yes, of course.
No,
So
but, no, it
sphere
makes sense, though.
casting is basically the same as ray casting, except you're doing it in every single
In
direction
the
at
sphere,
once,
yeah.
which at that point you might as well just use a collider.
Ah,
So I actually have a, quick little sample here because, of course, I'm not going to come to the table without visual aids, right?
of course.
So I built a little sample scene in Unity here, and I've got just like a, you know, couple of boxes here, and we've got a couple little soldiers that we have armed with, machine guns and things like that. And each of them actually has a different method of shooting. One is using ray casting, and the other one is using a projectile bullet. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play here, and we're going to watch what they do because I've actually already set up the AI for them to, track each other down and shoot one another. We'll see
Oh,
if this
that's cool.
doesn't like give my computer a, a conniption here. Um, all right, so here are our little guys. They're running at each other. All right, so you can see that the soldier on the right, I don't know if you can see the tiny, tiny projectile that he's shooting. I could probably increase the size of that. I'm sure that you guys
Yeah,
can
it's a
see.
little black dot, it
y-
looks like.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a little black dot that trails off. Let's see. I actually just paused it so that we can zoom in and look at exactly what's happening. So this guy over here on the left is shooting this large looking projectile bullet. I tried to increase the size so that you could actually see what was happening. And that projectile doesn't do anything until it hits the enemy player. And that's why what you're going to see is like sometimes the bullet goes past the enemy player and
Yeah.
sometimes it here we can actually hop back into that view. So that bullet, like sometimes you'll see that it just goes past the enemy because it doesn't hit him. I also built in like a little random spread so that they're not perfectly aimed. Um,
Oh,
Now the difference is this guy over here on the right, he is using raycast shooting. And so what you'll find is that that trail, that's actually just a visual effect. There's nothing attached to that. There's no colliders, there's no game objects, nothing. It's
and could you
literally just
make them
a light.
look the same if you wanted to?
What's that?
Could you make them look the same if you wanted to, even though they function differently?
Yeah, yeah, you could.
Okay,
Because all you could do, or like I guess what you would do is you would take that projectile and add the trail renderer to it. Which,
okay.
yeah, like I said, it's just a visual effect. It
For showing this off. Yeah, that's pretty neat, but so you're saying there's these 2 different ways to do it, but depending on the game, would any game only do one type, or do you think it's best that both are being employed depending on the situation?
see that's a good question because I think most first-person shooters rely on raycasting,
Okay.
because it's more efficient. The colliders tend to be a little bit more taxing as far as like resources on the computer. Um, Whereas the raycast is just instant and everything else is just a visual effect, so you don't have to worry about like, you know, creating this game object that's going to have its own variables, its own projectile speed, its
Mm.
own all of that stuff. Um,
So, like in a sniper game, when you're having to watch for the bullet, are they purposely using the collider version because they have to take if the game does this, take into account wind, distance, speed, all those little things. You wouldn't raycast that.
I wouldn't personally, just because it would, if you wanted to keep track of all those things, like whether or not the bullet hits, then you would have to introduce some math to it, where it's like,
Ah, I see.
where you're like,
Yeah,
okay, if I know that the projectile speed is X and the movement is going to be this, then I have to calculate, is that still in the raycast for that many seconds or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
it's interesting. Yeah.
So, and I can actually show you guys the code for each of them because, and I used the same AI controller for both of them. It's really simple. They just go towards each other and shoot at each other, but each of them has a different shooting method. So our projectile shooter, we have a game object that is a projectile. And then we have our vector 3 spread. So this is that randomizer that determines like, oh, which is great for like, machine gunning. And of course you
Oh,
can
yeah.
control that. So like, some guns can be more inaccurate than others, which I think is always a fun variable to play with.
Yeah.
And so basically, when it comes to the shooting, we just take our muzzle location, so the tip of the gun, we get the direction, so it's the direction that the character's facing. We're gonna run that little calculation down here where we add the randomization to the direction, and then we basically just spawn the bullet. And then the bullet just goes because we have our projectile script here that says, you know, translate forward at X speed, which in this case is 10. If I were going to be realistic, this would probably be like 200 because
Oh,
obviously those
okay.
bullets that we
Yeah,
were just looking at would be pretty easy to dodge.
yeah.
But yeah, you just spawn the projectile and go.
Wow.
Now the raycast shooting is a little bit more complicated out of the gate because obviously, well, I mean, we can just look at it here. Because what we're doing is in the shoot uh, part of the script, we're gonna cast that raycast, and then we calculate to see whether it hits or not. Now, regardless of whether it hits, that's when we add in our trail renderer, and that is like a whole other, that
Wow.
is so this entire portion of the script is for nothing but the special effect of seeing that orange line go in the direction that the bullet went. But
Based on the calculation it already made for where it's gonna be.
ex-
So it's like it knows where it's gonna be, and then it calculates how that looks.
exactly. And so
Okay.
what's cool about that is that technically, when you are visually confirming that that orange line hits the enemy, the damage has already been done. Like the bullet, the hypothetical bullet has already hit. So it's like it's just calculating, here was the muzzle, there was the hit, and I'm just going to draw a line between the two, and it, add some special effects to it to make it look like it's a tracer round.
Okay. Very cool.
Now, Adam, you mentioned that you have experience with games that use different types of hit calculation, right?
I guess so, yeah, because, there's a lot of games where they feel different between each game, and sometimes I don't know how much of that is just the movement or the controls, or how much of that is. And again, I don't know if, like, within the gaming industry, there's kinda like this set, "Oh, we're not gonna rebuild these calculations every time we make a shooter."
Yeah.
Here's kind of but I don't know if maybe a lot of times I think GoldenEye is another good example. Like, when
Mm,
you play GoldenEye, that feels different than playing Halo, which feels different than, uh, other games, but some games feel like Call of Duty, and it's like, when Call of Duty was made, that was a easy feeling game, so I wonder if they went for that simple control or the shooting, and then most games started copying that. Because I think after the Call of Duty's time, most games felt that same way.
I'm glad that you brought up Halo because I think that that is a perfect example of a game that they chose to use colliders because of the functions of the guns. So, like, for instance, in GoldenEye, they used ray casting because it was cheaper, as far as like resources go. And on the N64, they had to be very efficient with what they were doing. And
And you
none,
could tell there was a little bit of, like, auto aiming in a way. Yeah.
yeah. Whereas in Halo, look at the examples of the Needler and the plasma pistol.
Yeah.
Those are two weapons that physically cannot use ray casting because of the arcing that they have to do in order to hit their target. So because they have that homing built in, you have to use the collision of when the needler hits, and then there's a timer that goes off right before it explodes.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because I've noticed that in games where sometimes when I'm shooting, I'll pick up on, "Oh, am I visibly able to see the path of the bullet?" Because sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, and it's even funny that there are games that when you see the bullets, they're actually not meant to be, but they're slow enough where you can, like, "Oh, get out of the way."
Yeah.
Like, you can kinda get a feel of the physics. And so, again, is this kinda like the difference between, yeah, a company wanting to go collider versus ray trace? But also in Halo, do they do the ray casting? Do they, yeah, ray casting, is that what we're saying? Or ray,
Yeah,
yeah,
ray tracing I think is the lighting stuff.
lighting, yeah. So for the ray casting, and that's what I'm wondering, do most use both and then just one over another, or sometimes is the game built off that? Like, Halo is very physicsy, and, like,
Yes.
the feel of the weapons are like that too, and you need the collider for that.
I think so. I think that there's case by case basis for using each, and some games might go all one way or the other. In the past, I have been a firm believer in the all collider method. And the only
Yeah.
reason I do that is for the simplicity of I can code melee weapons and projectiles to both use the same damage collider. Um,
I mean, I like that idea. I think you brought up to me that a lot of times the ray casting is done for, latency, helping with, like, lag in a first person shooter or something where, yeah, that does make sense, but at the end of the day, it feels like a more fun system would be a collider-based system. I think you can get a feeling of it. The player can feel that in terms of what, like you showed in your example where you could see the bullet and,
yeah.
like, kinda play that way.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that, especially, fantasy games probably rely more on colliders too because of, like, arrows and crossbow
Oh,
bolts and
yeah.
things. You know, those
Yeah.
those are gonna be objects that are, like you said, easier to dodge. But yeah, I think that for resource intensivity and for communicating over networks to multiplayer, raycasting
Yeah.
might be the way to go. So, hopefully, this has kind of got you guys thinking about, like, the next time you play a game, try to, like, especially a shooter, try to imagine, like, calculate the time between
Yeah.
when your projectile hits its target and, like, when they take damage, because there's always a bit of latency there, and so you'll be able to tell. I think it's very easy to tell when a game is using raycast damage versus projectile damage.
And that got me to think, I wonder if that has an impact on the old, gamepad versus mouse and keyboard discussion. I wonder if almost in a way, raycasting, you get more out of it with mouse maybe, but, like, colliders, maybe it doesn't matter, you know?
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, obviously the speed of your, you know, player rotation makes a huge difference, and I think that
Yeah.
that's one of the advantages of mouse and keyboard. And I think that that was one of the things that was a big complaint about GBO2 on PC is that because mobile suit rotation is a stat, your mouse movements are throttled
Yeah.
anyway. So anybody who is amazing at shooters with mouse and keyboard probably was very frustrated at first when they jumped into
Yeah,
GBO2.
it and I came up with something later, it's like, do you when you play, like, an aircraft game and you're using a mouse, are you able to just turn the aircraft right around and then start shooting? It's like, no.
Yeah.
It's a big machine. So, yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's kind of like I said, the pros and cons of the raycasting versus colliders approach when it comes to shooters. I'm not sure which direction we're gonna go in for my game. But as with all things, I like to rather than build or rather than commit to one system and like have
Yeah.
that in the game, I'm like I'm gonna build like a little sandbox where we can test both and see which one is feels better. And like you said,
Yeah.
it's all about game feel.
Yeah.
Hey, kill these overhead lights. I feel like an angel over here, like, oh.
Oh, you are an angel. I don't know where I was going with that, but,
But one of the other things I wanted to talk about is smarter AI, because this is something that we
yeah.
just mentioned when it comes to like Gundam games and like there's a lot of games in general that just have kind of poor AI, especially when it comes to combat. And so I'm gonna
Yeah.
link a video in the chat here because this is the one that is the tutorial behind, kind of what I've been working on here. And so there's a couple of different ways to handle, you know, smart AI. And I think that there are, again, pros and cons to each approach. I'm going to be trying to show off one approach here on stream, but there is a much more complicated and much more resource intensive version of said approach. So obviously, we can hop back into our example here and you see what our guys do. They just run to the spot and start shooting each other. That's not very efficient. That's not very you know, there's very little self-preservation instinct going on here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even when it comes to something like GBO2, the AI characters will strafe, they kind of just like go side to side, but there's no real like they're not going to take cover from anything. They're not going to, you know, strategically try to position themselves around you. It's really just about like I'm just going to
Closing
try and
in. Yeah, it seems like with GBO2, the enemies are all about the perfect timing, the AI of closing in on you. It's like
yeah.
they come at you and it just knows how it has to operate around you to avoid getting hit, but hitting you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's almost like
And
Terminator.
again, part of that's is down to it being like a very old system. And
Yeah,
I think that that's also part of the resource intensivity being an online multiplayer game. Like they're not trying to overload the game with complex AI.
yeah.
Um, so one of the things, obviously, when it comes to self-preservation of an AI is cover-based shooting, which there's thousands
Oh,
of
yeah.
different implementations that we've seen over the years. Every game has their own version of cover-based shooting, but to me, what it comes down to is there are two sort of fundamental versions of doing it. One is procedural, which is very resource intensive. And what it would involve is like, let's say, for instance, we've got our
And are you sharing?
oh, am I, oh,
Okay, just
oops, forgot
cool.
to do my screen share here.
No, glad I caught that. Okay.
Oh, so yeah, I was just running the simulation and I didn't even have it showing. So anyway, we've got our little map here, and if I select the floor, you can see what our navigatable mesh is. It's everything that's in blue, and of course, with these individual objects. Actually, let me see if I can. Let's go ahead and show the surface all the time.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't commit to those other squares being rectangles, or it would look like a swastika.
That was unintentional, I swear. I just wanted a little bit of variety of cover.
Sure.
So one of the things that I did here is these blocks actually can carve out a section of non-navigation. So like the players cannot navigate inside the blocks, which is good. And we are going to be able to use these as cover. Um, Now, if we were to use the more resource intensive version of a cover based shooter, then what we would do is from the individual player, we would sample at random locations on that blue navigation mesh and say, uh, is this still in line of sight to a target? And if it is, then we need to select a different option. If it isn't, then that's safe cover and we can go there. You can understand how this probably get very would get very demanding on your system, especially if you have
Yeah.
tons of AI enemies and they're like all of them are sampling different areas and saying like, "Can I go here? Can I go here? Can I go here?" And then eventually, if they don't find any spot, then what do? So what a lot of games do is they have preset locations where you can go and take cover. So what they would do is they'd probably create a game object. In this case, like let's go ahead and if I grab one of our cubes and I create an empty game object underneath it, we'll call this cover spot. And what we can do is pull that here. Let's go ahead and add just like some kind of mesh. In fact, you know what? What we'll do is instead of making it an empty game object, we'll make it a solid game object. That way, um, you can actually see what we're doing here. So I created this cube here, scale it down, not all huge, like a. And so what you would do is you would position this cover location, somewhere right here. Rename it to cover. And then we would set that up as a location that our AI can go to. Now this, obviously, much less resource intensive because, you can just set the location. You don't have to worry about whether or not it's, a suitable location or anything like that.
So, like, if the player was entering a area of the map, and it would trigger that enemy to go to that location.
Yeah, exactly. And so like for instance, if we've got our soldier 2 over here, or let's do soldier 1. What we'll do is I can actually set it up so that their move targets and their aim targets are different. So I can actually drop this cover location into his move target. And if we hit play, you'll see that he'll actually run away from the other enemy AI because he's going to that cover location if it ever loads.
Oh, okay.
All right. So yeah, he whoa, because I didn't change his stopping distance. So he was running towards that. Actually, we can correct that.
And was the enemy was in his line of sight, so he stopped to fire at him?
So there's a I forgot that I set the attack range stopping
Oh,
distance to the same thing. What I want to do is we're actually going to drop that out and we're just going to set the stopping distance manually um so that we can do this in a way. So for this guy we're going to set our stopping distance to 1 so that it's not 10 meters away. um and then he's going to go directly to that spot, whereas the other soldier is going to try and get within range of this.
and I wanna ask chat real quick. Do you guys know the first game with a cover system? I think I do, but
Ooh,
then that could be up for debate.
I know the first one I ever played. So yeah, drop the first game that you think is the first game with a cover system. I'm curious if you and I have the same one, Adam.
I wanna say we've already had this discussion, but maybe
Quite
not.
possibly.
We'll see. Uh,
Let's see if our simulation works better this time.
okay. Yeah, Ultra, like, a game where you can use cover as a way like, that's part of the gameplay, whether it's automatic or they tell you to use cover, but something where it's you can go into cover and then fire from it. Yeah, I always think of cover as you're behind something, and if you press the left trigger, it's allowing you to peek out to shoot.
Yeah, take a look at this nav mesh agent. We're set the stopping distance 0. That's what we want. All right. So here in this version of our simulation, uh, hop into our scene view so that I can actually show you guys what we're looking at here. So the soldier wearing the black uniform is tracking him. He wants to go to that location and shoot at him. Whereas the soldier in the green uniform is trying to get into that cover location. Now, the downside of doing this method is that it is a pain in the butt to do level design this way because you're having to, every time you set up a level, you have to set up what, dozens, maybe hundreds, possibly thousands of these individual game
Yeah.
objects.
Okay, so then what I wanna do is say what game I think was first, and if what you think they did. Win back 64.
That's the one I always say.
Oh, okay, cool. I would assume because of that time, they probably programmed it specifically.
Yeah, I think that that one is, and you can tell that it was programmed specifically because there was always like, even if you were kind of maybe a foot away from the cover, it would snap your character to that spot, and then you would have the opportunity to
Yeah.
turn and shoot.
And yeah, so I think what then happened is there's like Kill Switch and Dead to Rights came out, and those both had really good cover systems. But I think it was Gears of War that like made it mainstream or made it where then like games had cover systems. And I wasn't a fan of the Gears of War because it's almost like you're locked into animations. It's almost like they were contextual movements of cover instead of full control. In Sniper Elite 5, a game I talk about a lot because I think it does a lot of good things right. It has what I call the minimal contextual cover system where if
Okay.
I if I go against a wall and I'm right near the edge, like the game almost knows what I'm doing, and so it has like a soft lock to where I can just hold down the left trigger and it will just pop me out because the game knows I'm at a corner. Now, I don't know if it knows I'm at a corner and there's enemies nearby, so it knows to put me in that, but then I can just move out of it because the idea is if I'm in cover, I don't need to move my character, so I could just press L to pop out. But if I didn't want to be locked there, luckily the game makes it real easy. I just move out of the way, you know. Um,
And that system I think goes all the way back to like even like Metal Gear Solid on PS1 has
Oh,
like
yeah.
what you would call like that contextual cover system,
Yeah,
where
that's right.
maybe for instance, in my example here, you have one cube which represents that's the cover spot. But like for instance, what you're talking about with Sniper Elite 5, go ahead and we're going to focus in on this cover. So with Sniper Elite 5, what you're probably looking at is instead of a single cover location, we're probably looking at a oh, not that way. We want to do this way.
Ah, where it's like across the object, like, yeah, any
Exactly. So
yeah.
like this entire area is cover area. And then that way you have the contextual controls to like move side to side because I mean that was one of the things in the PS1 Metal Gear Solid is once you were on a wall, you could
Right,
move side to side until you got
yeah.
to
It's
the
funny,
edge.
that would almost make that game be the first, even though it's more of that bird's eye tactical style game, because you get more of a view of everything else, and, um, so technically, it almost did it first.
Well, actually, but I
But
think
it's funny because Winback to me was the answer to Metal Gear Solid. It was like
yeah,
Konami hit it with Metal Gear Solid, and then Winback came out, which is pretty much more of a dir like a third person action version. Even though Metal Gear is third person action, it just feels different to me.
it does play a little different for
Yeah,
sure. Um, so
that's cool.
I guess what I would say is for the purposes of the game that I'm working on, I definitely don't want to go super resource intensive and do the procedural route because I don't want to bog down the system. But then this route seems like such a pain to build out. So I figure what we can do is leverage some of the built-in features that we have within Unity. And so so for instance, let's go ahead and delete our cover there. And I think we can actually probably open up this prefab from here. Let's go ahead and open our asset in isolation. So we've got our cube, right?
Mhm.
Let's go ahead and add some spheres around it, and those will represent our safe cover spots. And of course, because these spheres don't have any colliders or anything, this is just for visual aid so that you guys can see where the cover locations are. Go ahead and point 5. Let's just go ahead and duplicate that. One and point there. That 1.5 there. Duplicate that. What we are going to do is basically this is going to be all of our cover locations associated with this cube. And when we hop back in, now you see that every instance of this cube that we've used now has our cover location. And so what we can do is from there, we can actually build out a script that will, say for instance, we've got our cube here or our sphere here that represents cover for, say, Soldier 2, right? So let's grab that sphere and we are going to put it in. So it's sphere 3. We're going to put it in the move target for Soldier 2. And then over here, we can grab this sphere here, and we are going to set sphere 2 as the move target for 1. And one of the things I'd also like to do is let's go ahead and set our attack range super large. That way they're able to shoot at each other even from cover.
Okay.
Try to make this screen nice and big so that we can all see what's going on here. So then when we hop into play mode, we'll see that each of these soldiers is going to go to a cover location and fire at each other from super far away. I hope.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. Well,
So they're not shooting at each other. Maybe they're still not in range of each other as far as like their
noticing
oh
each
yeah,
other.
they are still not quite in range of each other. Let me go in and I'm going to change their shooting range to be ridiculous. Hit top 5, set the stopping distance on both to 0. And so hopefully you guys appreciate you'll never say that devs are lazy again.
Yeah.
But no, this kind of stuff is fun to me, especially like the debugging and experimenting because earlier when I was setting this up, like the characters were sliding and I didn't understand why.
It's interesting because yeah, with you have way more knowledge in this stuff than me, but it allows me to like as you're coming up with a problem to like think of solutions. Not
Yeah.
that I really know.
So here we go. Now we have two soldiers behind cover that are firing at each other.
Hmm.
And so what you can do, we can develop the logic programmatically to say like, okay, I want to look for any potential cover areas in this radius, right? And as long as that radius is within their attack radius, then they're going to look for cover in that area. And it's, again, much less resource intensive. You don't have to worry about, making all calculations on the fly. It's really just like how many cover locations are in this area.
Yeah, so you can still do procedurally generated levels and make it where it populates these walls that would be around like specific things in the map, just yeah, to make use of it. And I
Exactly.
like the idea of it being destroyable too. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because that is going to be the next thing that we're
Oh,
experimenting with my
okay.
game is so each of these blocks obviously is a game object, right? And we can attach that destructible script to it and we're going to show that off here probably in the next
Oh, sweet.
where the block is only going to have those cover locations as long as not destroyed. And then once it is destroyed, the entire game object is dissolved and therefore no more cover. So,
Yeah, I like that because then it makes that's something where it's almost you're introducing an element to the AI to then have to behave in a way you won't expect. You know,
right, because
it's
once that cover option disappears for them, then they have to recalculate and go. So,
yeah. And you know it's really neat too because what if then there could be a random modifier of different actions an enemy could do when they can't find cover or covers at a certain distance? One, they might dive prone on the ground because they
yeah.
feel like that's the only way I could, you know. Or what if they run away or they freak out or I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's ways game developers could be adding more things without it being complicated, just more of being a trigger, you know? It's like in Halo when you're taking out the grunts, if there's one grunt left, sometimes they just get scared and run away. They go, "Ah," and they just go run away. It's a pretty neat idea.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think Halo has a very primitive cover system, right? Because it's like when you're fighting one of the typically what they'll
yeah,
do is they don't
they go and
like
cover,
get their back up against a wall, but they do like hide behind
jump
something
out,
and then jump
jump in.
out, shoot, come
Yeah,
back. So and again, yeah, there's different ways to implement that sort of cover system where and even with these guys, like they're not crouching and getting behind the wall, but
yeah.
and that's a
That could
whole
be
other
added
thing
in.
is we can create those
Yeah,
colliders where once they hit the wall, they know that they're in cover and they crouch
yep.
down and then they can have those behaviors. So it's very complex behavior mapping, but once you kind of have some templates in place, like I said, once you've got like you have game objects that like these are always going to be cover, then you build those cover locations into it, then you can build your behavior.
Yeah, I sounds awesome. I feel like getting things like this down really helps the rest of the gameplay,
Yeah.
you know?
It definitely feels better and again to me it's all about engaging the player more and so much
Yeah.
of like there's just so many games out there where the AI is just too basic, where
Yeah.
it's gonna run up to you, it's gonna shoot, maybe it'll strafe a little bit. But one of the things that I want to implement is AI that is self-preservation,
Yeah.
oriented. They don't want you to kill them.
Yeah.
um, and then, I want them to also think tactically. So one of the other things that we could implement in this, and I think that you'll see this in like Naughty Dog, like when you're doing cover-based shooting in like Uncharted, you'll notice that some enemies, when they notice that you're firing in one direction, they'll try to outflank
Oh, yeah.
you and like go to the sides and kind of
Or
create.
throw grenades. That's another thing I noticed in some of these games. You go into cover, then they start throwing grenades at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sniper Elite 5 does that a lot.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
and so even for as advanced as what I would consider some really good AI, like in Metal Gear Solid 5, which I think I've talked about this, like the way that the AI will try to compensate for your
Oh, yeah.
tactics. So like if you typically will go for headshots, all of a sudden you'll notice that the soldiers start wearing helmets more often. And then like if you start to use sleep grenades more often, you'll notice that more of them are using gas masks so that you
That's
can't
awesome.
knock them out. That stuff is so cool to me. But like you said, if there's no cover around, they're not gonna like dive prone or something. They're just gonna like stand there and
Yeah. And I do think the idea of enemies starting to, like, dive into prone when they're caught off guard, like, or crawling on the ground
yeah.
to go somewhere, like, that would be neat to be implemented more. I mean, it's just a simple decision. I'd say it's simple, but it's
Mhm.
just more of, like, programming where maybe this enemy could go through the process of going prone and shooting. Whereas maybe that's not that big of a deal, but to the player, it's an emergent situations like, "Oh, whoa, this enemy just changed on me."
And to your point, I think it would be cool to have different options like you and I have talked about this before, like environmental hazards. Like,
Oh,
how
yeah.
cool would it be if there was an AI that if there's no cover available, they go and like hit a switch that like knocks down a bunch of
Oh,
explosive barrels on you and things like that.
excellent idea.
Because there's so many, I think, like especially when you look at different types of emergent gameplay and like Breath of the Wild and like Far Cry, there's so many things that the player can do that the AIs can't. You
You
can
are
you can push a
exactly right.
rock onto somebody in Breath of the Wild, but like a moblin's not gonna run up a hill and push a rock onto you.
Yeah, even in Helldivers 2, all the things around in the world that you can use to manipulate to hurt, the enemy, they don't use it on you, you
Yeah,
know? And that would be neat if there is explosive canisters, and in this game you're making, the enemy doesn't have any more cover or they can't do anything, so they go grab an explosive canister and throw it in your direction.
yeah.
It's little things like that.
I mean,
Yeah.
heck, even if you were, one of the things that I think would be cool is to have batch AI where it's like they're thinking tactically with each other. So one guy's shooting. This is the advantage of like state machines that are public is that, one AI can look at another AI and see like, okay, he's shooting. I'm gonna go grab explosive barrels and throw them. So then you have like mixed tactics going on, and that
I
I
love
think
that.
that's
It's
where
like the
the
idea of escalating AI, like escalating enemies. I think that that term, the escalation to emergent gameplay. Yeah.
yeah, we should coin that term. Let's
We got
trademark it.
Yeah, try to
Escalating
do some
AI.
like escalating AI or something and kind of show where like these the AI can choose from all these different options
Yeah.
against the player.
So that's all I had for today. Hopefully, you guys are going to be a little bit more, for the game devs in the audience. Hopefully, this is giving you some inspiration for your AI. For those of you that are just gamers, which I assume is like all of you, you're going to play your games with a little bit more scrutiny and kind of appreciate some of these things a
Yeah.
little bit more.
Yeah, you just
Hopefully, it'll
ruined it
get you
for
thinking
everybody.
about like implementation stuff like that. I'm still not sure exactly 100% of the different ways that we're gonna go, but, you know, this is why I'm testing them all, right?
Yeah,
This
yeah, I think that if you just throw together the first thing you see, you might be missing
exactly.
something. Yeah, of
So, Adam, as always, I appreciate your feedback and your,
course.
contributions in the gaming realm because you have a vast, what I would call, um, what's the term I'm thinking of? Your gaming vocabulary is larger
Oh,
than mine because you've played so so many more varieties of games than I have. I've played
Okay.
like 2 types of games, and I try to copy everything that I see from those
Yeah,
2. Um, yeah, so if you guys haven't checked it out, there was a blue cast this morning as well as a Gundam Explained video. So
that's right.
there's a lot of fun stuff that Adam's putting out for you guys. Go check that out now, and we'll see you tomorrow for the Gundam Explained show.
That's right.
Yeah, so
That's right.
always a fun week when
Yep.
we get Gundam stuff, we get gaming stuff. Hopefully you guys
Refugees.
enjoy it. And again, shout out to Lil Krill and Sean Law for becoming new patrons, new members of the
Yeah.
channel. And we will, I guess, hopefully see you next week. I might have some videos planned here coming soon. Some things related to 3D printing that I did some spoilers
Ooh.
for on Sunday. But yeah, until then, we will catch you later.
Yep. See y'all.